Captain Jake Morrison stared at the massive research station spinning slowly against the backdrop of Kepler 442's pale yellow sun. The structure looked dead, its solar panels dark and communication arrays silent. His ship, the USS Endeavour, moved closer with careful precision while the crew ran their standard scans. "Anything on the sensors, Alex?" Morrison asked his chief science officer, Dr. Alex Turner, who was hunched over his console with deep concentration. "The station is definitely abandoned, Captain. No life signs, no power readings from the main reactor. But the hull is intact and the atmosphere is still holding in most sections," Turner replied without looking up from his instruments. Lieutenant Commander Lisa Bennett turned from her navigation station. "Sir, according to our records, this station was built by the Altarian Research Consortium about 40 years ago. It was supposed to be studying stellar formation patterns in this system." Morrison nodded slowly. The Galactic Council had assigned them this survey mission as routine work. Nothing more than updating star charts and checking on old installations. It was the kind of assignment that usually meant weeks of boredom punctuated by the occasional interesting rock formation or gas cloud. "Maria, any response to our hail?" he asked Communications Officer Maria Santos. "Nothing, Captain. All frequencies are silent. If anyone is aboard that station, they are not talking to us." The captain made his decision quickly. "Lisa, take us to docking port 7. Alex, I want a full analysis of that station's computer systems once we are aboard. Maria, keep monitoring all channels in case someone decides to wake up over there." The USS Endeavour was not a large ship by Council standards, but it was one of humanity's finest exploration vessels. Built in the orbital shipyards above Earth just 5 years ago, it carried a crew of 60 specialists whose job was to explore the galaxy's remote corners and report back to the colonial administration. As the ship moved into position, Morrison thought about his crew. They were good people who had signed up for adventure among the stars, not knowing that most of their missions would involve routine surveys of empty space and abandoned installations. The galaxy was vast and mostly boring, despite what the entertainment broadcasts back on Earth suggested. The docking procedure went smoothly, and within an hour Morrison led a small team through the airlock and into the silent station. Chief Medical Officer Dr. Sam Rodriguez carried his medical scanner, while Security Chief Nathan Brooks kept his hand near his weapon. Engineer Kelly Wright brought her technical equipment to assess the station's systems. The corridors were dark, except for the emergency lighting that cast strange shadows on the walls. Their footsteps echoed loudly in the empty spaces as they made their way toward the central computer core. "Air quality is good," Rodriguez reported, checking his scanner. "A little stale but breathable. Temperature is cold but not dangerous." They reached the main computer center after 10 minutes of walking through empty halls. Wright immediately went to work on the power systems while Turner began connecting his portable equipment to the main data banks. "This is interesting," Turner said after a few minutes of work. The computer core was not shut down properly. "It looks like the station was abandoned in a hurry." Morrison frowned. "What kind of hurry?" "The kind where people do not have time to follow standard evacuation procedures. Some of the data banks are still running on emergency power, which means they have been active for decades." Wright had managed to restore partial power to the section, and the lights came on with a soft hum. The computer displays flickered to life, showing streams of data in various alien languages. "Captain, I am detecting some unusual file structures in the database," Turner continued. "There are encrypted sections that require special access codes, but I am also finding references to something called Project Silence." Project Silence? Morrison had never heard that name before. Yes, and it appears to be connected to human colonial activities. There are mentions of coordinates, ship manifests, and population records, but everything is heavily encrypted. Brooks had been examining the personal quarters while the others worked on the computers. He returned with a puzzled expression on his face. "Captain, the living quarters show signs of hasty evacuation, but there is something strange. I found personal items from multiple species, including some human belongings, but according to our records, humans never worked at this station." Morrison felt a cold sensation in his stomach. "What kind of human belongings?" "Personal photos, clothing, a datapad with Earth calendar dates from 30 years ago. Someone named Amy Foster apparently lived here, but there is no record of any human named Amy Foster working for the Altarian Research Consortium." Turner looked up from his console with excitement. "Captain, I have managed to decrypt some of the files. You need to see this." The main display screen filled with data streams, ship logs, and what appeared to be colonial records. Morrison read the information carefully, his confusion growing with each line. These are records of human colonies that were supposedly destroyed by hostile forces, he said slowly. But according to this data, they were not destroyed at all. That is not the strangest part, Turner replied. These files suggest that the colonies were deliberately targeted by Council forces, and their populations were relocated to work camps on various worlds. The implications hit Morrison like a physical blow. For 30 years, humanity had been told that their early colonial expansion attempts had failed catastrophically. The Council had explained that hostile alien forces had destroyed the colonies, and that Earth needed their protection to prevent similar disasters. But if these files were accurate, the Council had been lying about everything. Rodriguez joined them at the display. Captain, if this information is correct, then thousands of human colonists who were supposedly killed are actually alive somewhere in Council space. Morrison stared at the data, his mind racing through the possibilities. If the Council had lied about the colonies, what else had they lied about? How many humans were still out there, believing they had been abandoned by Earth? Alex, can you copy all of this data? He asked quietly. Already working on it, Captain, but we should be careful. If this information is what I think it is, then we have just stumbled onto something that certain people would kill to keep secret. Wright looked up from her technical scans. Captain, there is something else. This station was not just studying stars. The equipment here is designed for long-range communication and data collection. Someone was using this place to monitor human activities throughout this sector. Morrison made his decision. Pack everything up. We are leaving immediately, but we are taking all of this data with us. As they prepared to return to their ship, Morrison could not shake the feeling that they had crossed a line from which there would be no return. If the files were genuine, then everything humanity believed about their place in the galaxy was built on lies. The question was, what were they going to do about it? Captain Morrison paced the bridge of the USS Endeavour as the ship jumped to hyperspace. The encrypted files from the research station were safely stored in their computer banks, but the weight of what they had discovered pressed heavily on his mind. He had made the decision to investigate the coordinates mentioned in the files, despite having no authorization for such a mission. Dr. Turner worked frantically at his science station, cross-referencing the stolen data with official Council records. What he found made his blood run cold. Captain, according to these files, New Geneva Colony was established 32 years ago, with a population of 40,000 people, Turner announced. The official Council records state that it was destroyed by raiders from the Void Sector, with no survivors. But the coordinates in those files suggest otherwise, Morrison replied grimly. How long until we reach the system? 6 hours at current speed, Lieutenant Commander Bennett reported from the navigation console. Morrison knew he was taking an enormous risk. If the Council discovered that a human vessel had gone off mission to investigate classified information, the consequences would be severe. But the possibility that thousands of human colonists might still be alive somewhere outweighed his concerns about protocol. Sir, incoming transmission from Colonial Command, Communications Officer Santos announced. They want our status report. Morrison hesitated for a moment. Tell them we are conducting extended surveys of the outer system. Technical difficulties with our communication array are causing delays in our reports. It was not exactly a lie, but it was not the whole truth either. Morrison justified the deception by telling himself that they needed time to investigate before reporting their findings through official channels. The hours passed, slowly as the crew prepared for whatever they might find at the coordinates. Chief Medical Officer Rodriguez checked the medical supplies while Security Chief Brooks ensured that all weapons systems were functional. Engineer Wright ran diagnostics on the ship's stealth capabilities, knowing they might need to avoid detection. When they finally dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the target system, what they saw defied all expectations. Instead of empty space or a debris field, they found a thriving world with orbital installations and regular traffic between the planet and several moons. My God, Turner whispered as the sensor data filled his screens. There are millions of life signs on that planet. The orbital facilities show industrial activity, agricultural systems, and what appears to be a major spaceport. Morrison stared at the main display in disbelief. Are those ships leaving and entering the atmosphere? Yes, sir, but they are not human designs. They appear to be council transport vessels and cargo haulers. The implications were staggering. If this was indeed the site of New Geneva Colony, then the council had not only lied about its destruction, but had allowed it to continue operating under their control. Captain, I am detecting human life signs on the planet's surface, Rodriguez reported from his medical scanners. The biosignatures are definitely human, but there are also several alien species present. Morrison made his decision quickly. Take us to the edge of the system and engage full stealth mode. I want to know what is happening down there before we announce our presence. The USS Endeavour moved carefully through the outer system, using asteroids and gas clouds for cover. As they drew closer to the planet, the ship's sensors revealed more disturbing details. Captain, the planetary settlements show signs of segregated populations, Turner reported. There are distinct residential areas that appear to be divided by species, with humans concentrated in what look like labor compounds. Labor compounds? Morrison felt his anger beginning to build. The structures are consistent with worker housing, but they are surrounded by security barriers and monitoring stations. The human populations appear to be restricted to specific areas of the planet. Wright looked up from her engineering station with a grim expression. Sir, I am detecting energy signatures consistent with control collars and tracking devices throughout the human residential areas. The horrible truth was becoming clear. New Geneva Colony had not been destroyed by raiders. It had been turned into a slave labor camp operated by the Council. We need to get down there and make contact with the colonists, Morrison said, but we cannot risk exposing our presence to the orbital stations. Rodriguez stepped forward. Captain, I volunteer to lead a covert landing party. My medical training will provide good cover if we are discovered, and I have experience with alien cultures. Brooks nodded his agreement. I will provide security, and Wright should come along to assess their technological situation. Morrison approved the mission, knowing that he was sending his people into extreme danger. If they were caught, the Council would have proof that humanity was conducting unauthorized operations in their territory. The landing party used a small shuttle to reach the planet's surface under cover of a severe thunderstorm. They landed in a remote area several kilometers from the nearest human settlement and proceeded on foot through dense forest. What they found when they reached the edge of the settlement broke their hearts. Thousands of humans lived in cramped housing blocks surrounded by energy barriers. Guard towers staffed by alien overseers watched over the compounds, and human workers moved between industrial facilities under constant supervision. This is not a colony, Wright whispered as they observed from the tree line. This is a prison camp. Rodriguez used his medical scanner to examine the humans from a distance. They are healthy but show signs of malnutrition and psychological stress. The control collars are suppressing their natural aggression and independence. As they watched, a group of human workers returned from their shift at a nearby mining operation. They moved with the defeated posture of people who had given up hope long ago. Brooks spotted movement in the shadows near one of the housing blocks. Someone is signaling to us, he reported. A young woman emerged from the shadows and approached their position carefully. She looked around nervously before speaking in a whisper. Are you from Earth? She asked desperately. Are you here to help us? Rodriguez stepped forward slowly, keeping his hands visible. We are from Earth, but we are not here officially. What is your name? Amy Foster, she replied. My grandmother was one of the original colonists. We have been waiting for rescue for 30 years, but the overseers told us that Earth had forgotten about us. The name from the research station files. Morrison had been right to investigate. Amy, we need to know everything about this place, Rodriguez said urgently. How many humans are here? Who controls the colony? How many other places like this exist? Amy looked around nervously before answering. There are over 50,000 humans on this world alone, but we know of dozens of other colonies that suffered the same fate. The Council told Earth that we were all dead, but they have been using us as workers for decades. The full scope of the conspiracy was becoming clear. The Council had not only lied about the destruction of the colonies, but had deliberately enslaved the populations while hiding their existence from Earth. We have to get this information back to our ship, Wright said urgently. Earth needs to know what happened here. Amy grabbed Rodriguez's arm desperately. Please do not leave us here. We have been planning a resistance movement, but we need help from the outside. Rodriguez looked at his companions, knowing that they had stumbled onto something far larger and more terrible than they had imagined. The discovery would change everything for humanity, but first they had to survive long enough to get the truth back to Earth. As alien patrol ships began circling overhead, the landing party realized that their presence had been detected. The race to expose the Council's lies had begun. The USS Endeavour barely escaped the New Geneva system as Council patrol ships closed in on their position. Captain Morrison ordered an emergency jump to hyperspace, just as alien fighters began launching from the orbital platforms. The ship shuddered under the strain of the hasty departure, but they managed to reach the safety of deep space. "Captain, we have incoming transmissions from multiple human vessels," Communications Officer Santos reported with excitement. "It looks like other ships have been investigating similar anomalies." Morrison felt a surge of hope mixed with concern. If other human crews had discovered the same evidence, it meant the conspiracy was even larger than they had imagined, but it also meant they were not alone in their fight for the truth. "Put me through to the nearest vessel," Morrison ordered. The main screen filled with the image of Admiral Patricia Cole, commanding officer of the battlecruiser USS Defiance. Morrison had served under Cole early in his career and knew her to be a woman of absolute integrity. "Jake, thank God you are safe," Cole said with obvious relief. "We have been monitoring Council communications and detected unusual patrol activity in your sector." "What did you find?" Morrison quickly briefed Cole on their discoveries at the research station and New Geneva colony. As he spoke, he watched the Admiral's expression grow darker with each revelation. "Admiral, the implications are staggering," Morrison concluded. "If the Council has been lying about the colonies, what else have they been hiding from us?" Cole nodded grimly. "More than you know, Jake. I have been conducting my own investigation based on similar evidence gathered by other ship commanders. We need to meet immediately to coordinate our findings." Within hours, a small fleet of human vessels had gathered at a remote asteroid field, far from any Council monitoring stations. The ships included exploration vessels, research ships, and even a few military cruisers whose commanders had begun questioning official narratives about human losses in space. Morrison attended the emergency meeting aboard the USS Defiance, where he met with Cole and several other captains. The group included Commander Ryan Murphy, an intelligence officer who had been tracking inconsistencies in Council reports for months. "Gentlemen and ladies, what we have discovered goes far beyond missing colonies," Murphy began as he activated a holographic display. "The Council has been systematically deceiving humanity about our place in the galaxy for over 50 years. The display showed a complex web of lies and cover-ups that made Morrison's head spin. According to Murphy's research, the Council had been deliberately limiting human expansion while secretly harvesting their technological innovations and using their populations as slave labor. Every major breakthrough in human technology over the past decades has been copied and distributed to Council member species," Murphy continued. "Meanwhile, we have been given inferior versions to keep us dependent on Council guidance and protection." Dr. Turner, who had accompanied Morrison to the meeting, studied the data with growing anger. "This means our fusion reactors, our medical advances, even our agricultural techniques have been stolen and used by aliens who pretend to be our protectors." Cole stood and activated another display, showing star charts marked with suspected slave colony locations. "Based on the evidence gathered by multiple crews, we estimate that over 2 million humans are currently being held in work camps throughout Council space." The number hit Morrison like a physical blow. 2 million people who thought they had been abandoned by Earth, living as slaves while the Council fed lies to humanity about failed colonial expansion. "Admiral, we have to expose this conspiracy," Morrison said urgently. "Earth needs to know what has been done to our people." "It is not that simple, Jake," Cole replied. "The corruption extends to the highest levels of human government. We have identified several officials in the colonial administration, and even some members of Parliament who appear to be working with the Council to maintain the deception." Murphy nodded his agreement. "Director Charles Kim of Human Colonial Affairs has been actively suppressing reports of anomalous discoveries. Ambassador Helen Parker has been working to discredit any evidence that contradicts the official narrative about the colonies." Morrison felt his world collapsing around him. If human leaders were complicit in the conspiracy, then standard communication channels could not be trusted. Any attempt to report their findings through official channels would be blocked or ignored. What about the media? Turner suggested. Surely there are journalists who would be interested in this story. We have identified a few potential allies, Murphy replied. Senator Bill Crawford has been asking difficult questions about colonial policies, and investigative journalist Claire Thompson has been looking into inconsistencies in government reports about space exploration. Cole made the decision that would change everything. We are going to gather irrefutable evidence and present it to the public simultaneously, through multiple channels. The Council and their human collaborators will not be able to suppress the truth if it comes from everywhere at once. The assembled captains agreed to coordinate their efforts. Some would continue gathering evidence from abandoned installations and hidden colonies, while others would work to establish secure communication networks with sympathetic individuals on Earth. Morrison volunteered to lead a rescue mission to extract key witnesses from the slave colonies. We need people who can testify about their experiences, he argued. Video evidence and data files can be dismissed as fabrications, but human testimony will be harder to ignore. As the meeting concluded, Wright approached Morrison with disturbing news from her technical analysis of the New Geneva colony. Captain, the technology being used to control the human populations is far more advanced than anything the Council has shared with Earth, she reported. The control collars and monitoring systems represent decades of development that we were never told about. The implication was clear. The Council had not only been stealing human innovations but had been developing advanced control technology specifically designed to manage human populations. Dr. Rodriguez joined them with equally troubling medical data. The genetic samples I collected from New Geneva show signs of systematic modification. The Council has been experimenting on human populations to enhance their suitability for specific types of labor. Morrison felt his anger building to dangerous levels. The Council had not just enslaved humans, they had been treating them as laboratory animals for genetic experimentation. Admiral, we need to move quickly, Morrison said to Cole. Every day we delay means more suffering for our people in those camps. Cole agreed, but she also understood the enormous risks they were taking. If we move too fast or make mistakes, the Council could eliminate all evidence and dispose of the slave populations before we can save them. As the fleet prepared to disperse on their various missions, Morrison looked around at the faces of his fellow officers. These were people who had sworn to serve humanity's interests, and now they were about to risk everything to expose the greatest betrayal in human history. The conspiracy was vast and deep, involving aliens and humans at the highest levels of power, but Morrison and his allies had something their enemies did not expect. The righteous fury of people who had discovered that everything they believed about their place in the galaxy was built on lies. The war for truth was about to begin, and humanity would never be the same again. Captain Morrison's evidence reached Earth through a network of secure channels that bypassed the normal colonial administration systems. Senator Bill Crawford received the encrypted files in his private office just as he was preparing for another frustrating session of Parliament, where his questions about colonial policies had been repeatedly dismissed. Crawford stared at his computer screen in disbelief as he reviewed the data from New Geneva colony and dozens of other locations where human populations were being held as slaves. The photographs and video recordings showed thousands of people living in controlled conditions, while alien overseers directed their labor in mining operations and manufacturing facilities. My God, Crawford whispered to himself as he realized the scope of the conspiracy. For 30 years, he had been voting on budgets for colonial rescue operations that were actually funding the enslavement of human populations throughout Council space. The senator immediately contacted investigative journalist Claire Thompson, who had been working on a series of articles about inconsistencies in government reports on space exploration. When Crawford shared Morrison's evidence with her, Thompson knew she had stumbled onto the biggest story of her career. Senator, if this information is accurate, it means that every family who lost someone in the colonial expansion has been lied to for decades, Thompson said as she studied the files. Parents who thought their children died in alien attacks will learn that they have been slaves all this time. Crawford nodded grimly. We need to coordinate the release of this information carefully. If Director Kim and his allies get advance warning, they will try to suppress the evidence and discredit everyone involved. Meanwhile, General Linda Hayes was conducting her own investigation within the military command structure. Hayes had always been suspicious of the colonial administration's explanations for the high casualty rates in early expansion efforts, and Morrison's evidence confirmed her worst fears. Hayes discovered that certain military officers had been receiving payments from shell companies connected to council interests. These officers had been responsible for organizing the so-called rescue missions that always arrived too late to save any colonists from supposed alien attacks. Colonel, I need you to identify every officer who participated in colonial evacuation operations over the past 30 years, Hayes ordered her aide. Cross-reference their financial records and look for any suspicious payments or unusual wealth accumulation. The investigation revealed a network of corruption that extended deep into the military hierarchy. Officers who should have been protecting human interests had been collaborating with alien forces to maintain the illusion of failed colonial expansion. At the same time, Director Charles Kim was working frantically to contain the growing threat to his carefully maintained deception. Kim had built his career on managing the relationship between humanity and the Council, and any exposure of the conspiracy would destroy him personally and professionally. Ambassador Parker, we have a problem, Kim said during an encrypted communication with the human representative to the Council. Several ship commanders have been conducting unauthorized investigations, and they may have discovered evidence of the colonial operations. Ambassador Helen Parker had been the Council's most valuable asset within human government, using her position to ensure that any inconvenient discoveries were buried or explained away. She understood that the exposure of the conspiracy would mean the end of her comfortable relationship with alien interests. Charles, we need to move quickly to discredit these ship commanders before their evidence reaches the public, Parker replied. Can we have them arrested for violating their mission parameters? Kim considered the option, but he knew that arresting popular ship captains without clear justification would raise more questions than it answered. Instead, he decided to use his influence within the colonial administration to have Morrison and the other investigating officers recalled to Earth for disciplinary hearings. However, Admiral Cole had anticipated such moves and had positioned her fleet beyond the reach of Earth-based authorities. When the recall orders arrived, Cole simply ignored them and continued her operations to gather evidence and rescue enslaved humans. Captain Morrison, we have received official orders to return to Earth immediately, Communications Officer Santos reported aboard the USS Endeavour. Morrison looked at the message with contempt. Maria, send a reply stating that we are experiencing communication difficulties and cannot receive detailed transmissions. We will continue our current mission until we can establish better contact with headquarters. It was a transparent excuse, but it bought them time to complete their operations before facing the inevitable confrontation with Earth authorities. Dr. Turner had been working around the clock to decrypt more files from the research station, and his discoveries kept getting worse. The evidence showed that the Council had been conducting systematic studies of human psychology and behavior, developing increasingly sophisticated methods for controlling human populations. Captain, these files describe experiments in social manipulation and behavioral conditioning that have been ongoing for decades, Turner reported with obvious disgust. They have been testing different approaches to keeping humans compliant and productive while minimizing the risk of rebellion. Engineer, Wright had made equally disturbing discoveries about the technology being used in the slave colonies. The control systems are designed to suppress human creativity and independent thinking, while enhancing physical capabilities for manual labor, she explained. It is as if they have been trying to turn humans into perfect workers, Chief Medical Officer. Rodriguez confirmed that the genetic modifications being performed on enslaved humans were designed to make them more suitable for specific types of work. Some populations have been enhanced for mining operations in high-gravity environments, while others have been modified for agricultural work in different atmospheric conditions. The picture that emerged was one of systematic exploitation that treated humans as a resource to be optimized for maximum utility, rather than as intelligent beings with rights and dignity. Morrison received regular reports from rescue operations being conducted by other ships in Cole's growing fleet. Each mission revealed new horrors and confirmed the vast scale of the conspiracy. Admiral, The USS Explorer has successfully evacuated 300 humans from an agricultural colony in the Vega system, Morrison reported during a secure communication. The colonists report that similar operations exist throughout that sector, with human populations being used to develop farming techniques that are then exported to Council worlds. Cole coordinated the growing resistance movement from her flagship while maintaining communication with sympathetic elements on Earth. The plan was becoming clear. They would simultaneously release irrefutable evidence through multiple channels while conducting large-scale rescue operations to bring witnesses back to Earth. Jake, we are going to get one chance to expose this conspiracy before our enemies can react, Cole said. Once Senator Crawford and journalist Thompson release the evidence, the Council and their human collaborators will do everything possible to suppress further revelations. Morrison understood the stakes. If they failed to present overwhelming proof of the conspiracy, the evidence could be dismissed as fabrications created by rogue military officers. But if they succeeded, the exposure would fundamentally change humanity's relationship with the galaxy. As the pieces of their plan fell into place, Morrison felt a mixture of anticipation and dread. The truth would finally be revealed, but the consequences would be enormous for everyone involved. The moment of reckoning was approaching, and humanity would soon learn the terrible price of trusting their alien protectors. Senator Bill Crawford stood before the emergency session of the United Nations General Assembly, with the weight of human history on his shoulders. Behind him, massive displays showed the evidence that Captain Morrison and his allies had gathered from across Council space. Photographs of enslaved humans, video recordings of alien overseers, and documented proof of the conspiracy filled the screens. Ladies and gentlemen, for 30 years we have been told that our colonial expansion efforts failed because of hostile alien attacks, Crawford began, his voice carrying across the silent assembly hall. Today I present evidence that these failures were deliberate acts of betrayal by the very organization that claimed to protect us. At the same moment, journalist Claire Thompson was broadcasting the same information across every major news network on Earth and throughout the human colonies. Her investigation had uncovered financial records showing payments from Council sources to human officials, communication logs proving coordination between alien forces and corrupt administrators, and testimony from rescued colonists describing decades of enslavement. The Galactic Council has been systematically enslaving human populations while feeding lies to Earth about colonial disasters, Thompson reported as the evidence streamed across billions of screens. Over 2 million humans currently live in work camps throughout Council space, believing they have been abandoned by their home world. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Across Earth and the human colonies, crowds gathered in streets and public spaces as the full scope of the betrayal became clear. Families who had mourned lost relatives for decades learned that their loved ones might still be alive in alien labor camps. Director Charles Kim tried desperately to contain the situation from his office in the Colonial Administration Building. "This is fabricated evidence created by rogue military officers," he declared in a hastily organized press conference. "The Council has been humanity's greatest ally in space, and these accusations are dangerous propaganda." But Kim's protests were drowned out by the overwhelming evidence and the testimony of rescued colonists who had been brought back to Earth by Admiral Cole's fleet. Amy Foster, the resistance leader from New Geneva Colony, spoke directly to the cameras from the steps of the United Nations building. "I am Amy Foster, granddaughter of Elizabeth Foster, who was among the original colonists of New Geneva," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "For 30 years my family has lived as slaves under alien overseers who told us that Earth had forgotten us. Today I learned that Earth never knew we were still alive." Ambassador Helen Parker made her own attempt to discredit the revelations, claiming that the evidence had been misinterpreted and that any human populations found in Council space were there voluntarily as part of legitimate work programs. Her explanations fell apart when rescued colonists described the control collars, genetic modifications, and brutal working conditions they had endured. The Council's response was swift and predictable. Within hours of the revelation, Council forces began moving toward human space while their representatives demanded that Earth surrender the terrorists who had conducted unauthorized operations in Council territory. "The humans have violated our sovereignty and stolen classified Information, the Council's chief representative declared. We demand immediate compensation and the prosecution of all individuals involved in these illegal activities. But the Council had underestimated the fury of a species that had discovered it had been systematically betrayed and exploited. Instead of backing down, humanity responded with unprecedented unity and determination. Admiral Cole led a growing fleet of human vessels toward the Council's primary stronghold while governments across Earth and the colonies mobilized their military forces. Dr. Turner's analysis of captured Council technology had revealed weaknesses that human engineers could exploit, and Engineer Wright had developed new weapon systems based on the stolen alien designs. All Council vessels in human space have 48 hours to withdraw beyond our borders, the emergency coalition government announced. Any alien forces remaining in human territory after that deadline will be considered hostile invaders. The Council had expected humanity to negotiate or submit to their demands, but instead they found themselves facing a species whose rage had finally boiled over after decades of suppression. Human fleets began systematic attacks on Council installations, while rescue operations evacuated enslaved populations from work camps throughout alien space. Morrison commanded one of the largest rescue fleets, leading dozens of ships to liberate human colonies that had been hidden for decades. At each location they found thousands of people who had been told that Earth had abandoned them to die in space. This is Captain Jake Morrison of the United Earth Fleet, he broadcast to the terrified colonists. We are here to take you home. The liberation of the slave colonies revealed the full extent of the Council's crimes against humanity. Genetic laboratories where humans had been modified for different types of labor, indoctrination centers where children were taught to accept their slavery as natural, and execution facilities where rebellious colonists had been eliminated to maintain order. Dr. Rodriguez documented the medical evidence of systematic abuse while his teams worked to reverse the genetic modifications and remove the control devices that had kept the colonists compliant for decades. The Battle of Council Prime became the turning point in what historians would later call the Liberation War. Admiral Cole's combined fleet, supported by alien species that had suffered under Council domination, surrounded the Council's capital world and demanded the immediate release of all enslaved populations. This is Admiral Patricia Cole of the Free Human Alliance, she broadcast to the Council leadership. You have 48 hours to release all human slaves and surrender your war criminals for prosecution. Any attempt to harm the remaining prisoners will result in the complete destruction of your government. The Council's military forces were no match for the fury of liberated humanity. Human technology, no longer limited by artificial restrictions, advanced rapidly as engineers and scientists worked around the clock to develop new weapons and defenses. The aliens who had kept humanity weak and dependent discovered that they had created their own worst enemy. Within 6 months, the corrupt Council government had collapsed and been replaced by a voluntary alliance of free species. The human slave colonies had been liberated and their populations relocated to new worlds where they could rebuild their lives in freedom. Morrison found himself promoted to admiral and placed in command of the new Colonial Defense Force, tasked with ensuring that no species would ever again be subjected to the kind of systematic oppression that humanity had endured. We will never forget what was done to us, Morrison declared at the dedication of the memorial to the lost colonies. But more importantly, we will never allow it to happen to anyone else. The galaxy had learned that humanity's greatest strength was not their technology or their military might, but their refusal to accept injustice even when it was disguised as protection. The species that had been dismissed as primitive and controllable had become the champions of freedom for all intelligent life. Amy Foster, now serving as the first human representative to the Free Worlds Alliance, stood beside Morrison as they watched ships departing for new colonies that would be built on principles of equality and mutual respect. My grandmother would have been proud to see this day, she said quietly. Her people are finally free to reach for the stars again. The age of deception was over, and humanity's true expansion into the galaxy had finally begun.